Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. That was a great verbal introduction to who I am from Nicole, so thank you. But now, before I go any further, I would love to give you a visual introduction to the type of work that I do and direct. Thank you. Thanks. I'm not actually going to be showing too much work today, but what I will be talking about is obviously today's topic. And I'm going to be talking about this topic in a couple of different ways it could be interpreted. One of them I'm going to be doing through telling a story. We're going to do an activity together, and then I will show a bit of a show and tell, a final kind of project at the end. So without further ado, vision. When we as creative people hear the word vision, we might immediately associate it with the second thing that comes up when you Google what is vision. And that is the ability to think about or plan the future with imagination or wisdom. And, for us, that would be, I suppose, in the context of what we create. And then, of course, obviously, or maybe not obviously, I think obviously the very first definition that comes up is the faculty or state of being able to see. And today I'm going to be talking about both of these, but we're going to start with definition 2. I see that second definition as having two main subcategories, and that is how it manifests for vision in your life and vision for your creativity. So life vision, just to give you a bit more insight into what that means, is probably how, like, the goals that you envision for yourself, how you see your future and who you want to be. Maybe it's even your bucket list. And then creative vision is the ideas and how you find creative solutions to problems in order to solve them. But I think ultimately they both come down to this, which is that vision is a result of inspiration and a source for drive. I think that vision needs external inspiration in order to be generated. You need that thing that inspires you, that motivates you. And this could be a person, it could be an aesthetic that you really gravitate towards, or, a studio or a practice whose work you really admire. But of course, inspiration can also come from stories. And I think we as animators, at Never Sit Still, we're constantly telling stories through our work, as most people who are doing creative practices do. Even graphic design is finding a way to communicate a story. And for life vision as well, motivational speakers exist just for that reason, to help inspire you throughout your life. Inspiration is actually listed as a synonym, though, for vision in the dictionary. And I'm not saying that I disagree with Oxford, but I do think that inspiration is kind of more of the catalyst that then gives you the vision that you have. And that vision then gives you the motivation to do. So vision is kind of the kindle to that flame of ambition and drive. And, I think if you feel like you were lacking drive or motivation, the logical conclusion is that maybe you need to figure out how to harness your vision. So how does one do that? Is it something that you're born with, or maybe is it something that that is nurtured from the people and influences that you surround yourself with? I'm sure we've all heard this phrase, you either have it or you don't. And I don't agree with that at all. I think, creativity is, of course, very subjective. And while someone might be able to, or might never be able to create something within a particular style, they can still do many other things. And basically, anyone can have vision, because by that logic defined by me, all that you need to have vision is to figure out what inspires you. A really strong sense of inspiration can make ideas come to you easily. And just for an example, when I saw the topic for this month's theme, I immediately knew what I wanted to speak about without, I didn't know how I was going to put it together, but I knew what I wanted to talk about. And that was the result of an inspiration for me that is really strong. And that inspiration is a person and also a really powerful story. Ironically, I think I get my sense of vision from my blind grandfather. So I mentioned that I was going to talk about the two definitions of vision today throughout this talk, but actually there's a third one that sort of exists between the two, which I'm going to touch on as well, and that is to bring before the mind's eye. And my granddad had a very incredible ability to do this, especially after he was blinded. So now, if you indulge me, I would actually like to tell you a story, and this story is about my grandfather's life. And while you're listening, I would like for you to try to visualize in your mind's eye some of the context and be conscious of how easily you're able to picture these scenarios. My granddad, George or Georgi, was born in 1930 in Greek-occupied Macedonia, in a really small little village called Trisia that no longer exists. And this is the home that he grew up in. It was one of the larger ones in the village, but the floors were made from mud and there was no running water or electricity. It was so cold in winter that they would all sleep on the floor, on the top floor, and bring all of the animals inside the house at night to kind of heat the house up. And he lived there with his grandparents, parents, his older and younger brother, and his younger sister. When World War II began, the village went into quite a state of unrest as it was used for a thoroughfare for supplies, also for storing supplies for the war. And when Georgi was 9 years old, the schools all closed down and he never had another opportunity to go back to school. His first brush with death was when he was 14 years old and he contracted a very intense lung infection, but there were no doctors in the area, so the family crossed country on foot and on the back of these little horses to find a doctor who, after seeing him, diagnosed him with, "You have 14 days left to live." And his mother was definitely not very happy about that diagnosis, so she took him to an auntie who applied a very non-traditional method for healing his disease. She had him stripped down and covered his body in chili, laying out in the sun for day after day after day. And at night, she would rub his body down with iodine and then wrap him up. And after 15 days, he'd outlived the doctor's diagnosis and was getting so strong that when they went back to the doctor, he asked Georgi's mother if he could adopt him because he really wished he had a very strong son like that. And she said no. When he was 16 years old, he became a messenger during the war for the communists, and he would take pieces of paper with incredibly important intel from different outposts, and he recalls having to crawl on the ground and hide from enemy troops, hide in bushes, and he was given the very important instruction that if he was to be captured, that he needed to eat all of the paper that he had on him, as no one was to be able to get their hands on that intel. And I think probably many of us in this room had a very different experience when we were 16 years old, and I can't really imagine being in that situation myself, but I think it really is a testament to his bravery and resilience even at such a young age. Chile actually saved his life a second time. As the war was progressing, the army started to come into the village and take the men from the homes out into the street to beat them. And this resulted in a lot of men actually coming into the village during the day and then leaving during the night to sleep in bushes outside of the village in order not to be found. But one day Georgi was home when they came to the door, and his mother's very quick thinking was to slather his body in garlic and chili sauce that she had just finished cooking from the stove. And when they saw the state that he was in, you can imagine, his skin blistered up and looked quite red. They thought, this guy's going to die anyway, and we don't really want to catch whatever he's got. So they left him, and that saved his life because no one who they took, I believe, ended up coming back that night. They say necessity is the mother of invention, and Georgi really grew up in a situation where it really required a lot of creative thinking and a lot of outside of the box ways of getting out of quite difficult situations. During the final stages of war, he became a guerrilla. I believe he was 18, and that is Guirr, whatever. It's not a monkey. And he was, experienced a wide variety of situations that he managed again to survive each and every one of them, including when he was captured to be tortured or sentenced to a firing squad. He managed to kind of creatively weasel his way out of all of these situations. And by kind of the end of this period of time in his life, he was the surviving male of the family. Also, they thought they ended up finding his little brother 10 years later in Yugoslavia. That's another story. And he was nominated to become the mayor of this village, but he decided to turn that down. This was age 20, in order to come to Australia and escape a life of war and persecution. So he hopped on an Italian refugee boat with about 100 other people crammed into a tiny little room and came to Australia, where he settled in Queanbeyan. For those of you who don't know, Queanbeyan is just outside of Canberra. And the only English that he came to the country with was yes and no, and that was it. And I do have a funny story about that, which I won't tell, but if you want to know, you can ask about that later. It took a while for him to settle, but eventually he started making friends with other migrants on construction sites, which is where he kind of got his footing for work. And they sort of helped each other learn English. And through this period of time, he began growing his skills. And he was known for being someone who was quite handy and very good at developing skills. And that sort of spiraled into leading him to working at the Australian National University, doing maintenance there at the uni. Around this time, he also met my grandmother, and they were married, and a year later had my mother. At the university, he was working for a man named Marcus Oliphant, and I don't know how many of you know the history of the atomic bomb, but Oliphant was actually a member of the team of people alongside Oppenheimer who developed the atomic bomb. And when all of that finished, he returned to Australia to ANU, where he continued to pursue some nuclear research and built a homopolar generator, which I don't know what that is, and you don't need to know what that is either to understand the story. But my granddad worked for this man and started out hanging paintings for him. And then the task kept growing and growing. He ended up doing plumbing, refrigeration, and kept impressing people with his work and his ability to adapt to all of the tasks, that he ended up becoming more of a scientist on the team. He liked to say that he was good at every single thing that he tried except for English. Now, this generator that they built, I'm not going to explain the science because I can't, but it was cooled by a material called NaK, which is a sodium-potassium alloy that is highly reactive. And my granddad ended up, like I said, being one of the people that was experimenting with this material, this chemical, to see how it would function and how they could utilize it properly. And quickly they realized it was very, very dangerous. Now, I should mention before I go any further that I'm very lucky to have all of this information documented in a book. A man named Terry Colquhoun interviewed my grandfather and documented all of his story down for him. And not only do I have this wonderful book, but I actually have some recordings from the interview. And I think it's really fascinating to hear how vivid and visual the descriptions are when he talks about things. I'm just going to pump the volume up for this 1 second.
It looked like a mercury, silver. Absolutely, you could see face on it like a mirror, but very light. As a matter of fact, even lighter than water. When it explodes, if you get a drop with the oxygen, it turns very quickly to a purple color. And if it turns after the purple color to a very bright yellow, almost blinds you, it would explode. It goes in very quickly. There's no seconds.
On July the 3rd in 1962, a decision was made to run the experiment that they were developing. And whilst there were warnings that it wasn't really ready to be run, there were faults with some filters and some of the barrels. They were pushed to run the experiment, and my grandfather was the man directly in line of the explosion.
Next thing I remember, I was 4.
The lead scientists were blinded by their ambition to run the experiment. George was blinded by their ignorance. In his life, George faced more trauma than most, but he survived it due to extreme resilience and bravery. And I remember him as a really kind, caring, loving, but also creative man. And I think after being blinded, he really had to tap into that creativity, and he really had to learn how to use the vision in his mind's eye. It's really fascinating, that ability to imagine, and especially how much you can end up relying on that when you lose a sense. But we're going to take some time now to talk about that third definition of vision, and that is the context of vision in the mind's eye. Aristotle defined or came up with the terminology phantasia for describing a sixth sense that separates perception from thought. And people might find this word a little bit familiar, or you may be more familiar with aphantasia, which I've heard recently a lot of discussions about this, and that is basically lacking the ability to see anything inside your mind. And it's a spectrum, and I think that this is quite a fascinating facet of vision. And, whilst I don't think it defines vision in other contexts, it is really just interesting to know where you sit on this scale. Like for me, for example, I think I'm probably around a 4. Sometimes I question if I'm at a 5, because when I read these captions come from some research that I did, and when with 5 says nothing, I only know I am thinking of an apple. That feels really relatable to me, but then maybe I can see an apple. I don't know. So we're going to find out together what you guys can all see. So if you would please close your eyes. I'm going to give you some prompts to think about, and then we're going to kind of gauge the room and see how everyone kind of fits on that scale. So I would like you to think about a duck. I want you to try and picture a duck. And with this duck, first of all, I want you to be conscious of how easy or difficult it is for you to hold the image in your mind. Does it take a lot of mental power, or is it something that you're able to hold there quite easily? Now I want you to think about the form of the duck. Is it vague? Is it kind of blurred? Or is it super crisp and clear? Maybe is it as clear as a photograph? Can you see the details, the feathers, the texture on the beak, the colors of the duck? Is the duck three-dimensional? Are you actually able to rotate the duck and see a different side of the duck? Can you see it from behind or underneath? And then what about, where is the duck for you? How are you actually picturing this duck? Is it floating in a void? Or did you actually imagine an environment that the duck is in? Or maybe is it even floating in front of you in this space? Okay, if you can open your eyes now. Firstly, I'm really curious, could you put up your hand if you saw the duck in a void? Okay, and what about in an environment? Okay, that's kind of 50-50 actually. That's really interesting. All right, now I'm really keen to see this. So who thought that they were a number 1 on the spectrum? Who had really, really intense detail of the duck? Who could move the duck around? Actually, quite a few of you. Yeah, that's really cool. Awesome. All right, number 2. Who was 2? Relatively clear. Yep. 3, moderately clear. 4, dim, vague outlines. And 5, does anyone have aphantasia? Wow, a few of you. Isn't that so fascinating? So this is just a small handful of people in this room, but we all have such different ways that we visualize things inside our minds. And I think, yeah, it's just a really interesting thing to draw attention to. We don't all see things the same way. Now, you may be wondering why a duck, of all things. The reason why I chose the duck was actually because when my grandfather found out he was going to be a grandfather, he had a vision. He needed to make a duck. And despite the fact that he had not seen a duck for 33 years of his life, nor anything, he carved me this. That source of inspiration for me, my grandfather, is so powerful, both for life and for my creativity. And I think there's some history behind how I feel like it kind of ended up with me being here today. So when I was a kid, I used to tell him, when I grow up, I'm going to invent eyes for you so that you can see. I told him that a lot, but as I got older, I realized that that's maybe not something that I had the technical or scientific knowledge to be able to do. So I turned to him for inspiration in other contexts, like when I took design technology in year 12, my immediate inspiration was that I wanted to design products to help the blind. But I also had no technical skills to build prototypes, so I made animations in order to explain how they work. That is my first animation ever. It is very static, not a lot happens. Occasionally something will happen there. But that kind of insight and that experience that I had there, first of all, made me choose to take design in university, and second of all, led me to having, I guess, a bit of a leg up for motion, and that sort of spiraled into me being here today. But also, I spent a long period of time of my childhood thinking about how to communicate something to someone who couldn't see. I spent a lot of time around him, and what this, I think, means for me now is that when I'm speaking to clients or pitching and we don't have visuals to go with the ideas that we're talking about, I've had a lot of practice with this skill, explaining things to people and with no visual to go with it, and trying to get them to see what I'm seeing. Of course, he's not the only source of inspiration for me. There are many other things that inspire you, and I'm not suggesting that you need to find the one thing that inspires you. You know, my family, my partner, a lot of different things inspire all aspects of my life, including things that piss me off about society. I'm very inspired by that. But yeah, so it is always a combination of things, but I do think it is quite fascinating, that butterfly effect, and how all of those things have kind of aligned to me now in this moment, having the idea for this talk. As creatives, we are often asked this question, which is, what's your creative method? And normally when I would be asked this question, I would sort of think, I don't fucking know, like, what the hell? I just make it happen. I just make it. It just happens somehow. I don't know. And I think that's kind of a cop-out. So I would get scared to be asked this question because I didn't want to cop out, but I didn't have an answer. But now I think I do have an answer, and that is that I know how to harness my sense of vision in order to get to the directive that I'm looking for. And that is kind of it. It's very flexible and adaptable to all types of processes. For example, finding initial reference. This is one of the main points where I feel like this skill comes into practice for my practice. And the way that I do this is, first I look on sites like Pinterest, Behance, and Instagram. A lot of my work is really digital based, so I do find most of my reference on digital platforms, but I also have a lot of subconscious influence from things around me in life. And then I dump it all into Google Slides, and this to me is a really important thing. It's probably not the first place you think of for reference finding or collecting. It's not very, it's a little bit clunky for that purpose, but that is exactly why I like it. I think it takes a lot of pressure off finding the reference when it is so rough, and that helps with procrastination. And then I start collecting every single thing that I like, that I see, if I think it could be even 10% relevant to the brief. I just find everything and I dump it all in the slides. Then I look for patterns in that, and I group them in context of things that seem to kind of go together. And that's when I sort of tap into that sense of vision, and it helps me, I guess, have the clarity to identify, you know, which options are the best ones to move forward with, or which option is the one that I'm going to do for myself. So to finish things off, I'm going to talk a little bit more about creative vision, back to that very technically second definition, but we spoke about it first. And show you a project that I directed at Never Sit Still. This is one that the whole team worked on, and it's one that we're all very, very proud of. It's called our anti-show reel, because we feel whilst show reels are great at giving a quick snippet into awesome work, they don't really say much, especially to our clients. So we wanted to develop a video that showcases all of the styles that we're capable of producing at Never Sit Still, whilst also communicates what it's like to work with us. Now, I think there are 3 stages where you really need to use your creative vision during the process of a project, and I'm going to explain those in relation to that project. So the first one is obviously that initial inspiration. We did just kind of go over this, but effectively it's finding it and narrowing it down. And that's kind of really the key point, is actually narrowing it down. So for example, on this project, the way that we process this brainstorm, this was actually done in Miro. I think it's a little bit more flexible when it's multiple people working on it than Google Slides. It's kind of super chaotic. And what I did for this is I broke down each of the kind of key sections or lines in the script into columns. So all of those columns are each of the main moments in the script. And I didn't want this to be a video that was just coming from my head. I wanted it to really represent the collective mind of Never Sit Still. So I got everyone on the team to fill out in the columns any ideas that they had for how we could visualize that line in the script, and also any styles that they thought could work really well. And then This is where the creative vision comes in. I went through it and culled all of the options down into ideas that I thought would really link nicely between each other through the sequence, and also ideas that would work well with styles in order to cover off, I guess, a really solid range of styles that we can work with. So I was thinking about all of those things and identified it down into a sequence. The second point you need that vision is when you come to a fork in the road in a project, basically whenever you need to make a choice. So for this project, and for me as a director, it's normally when people bring me options and I'm kind of trying to make a decision on which one's the best one to move forward with. But even prior to that, I think, I definitely remember choosing of all of the options I was making, which one I think was the best to put more effort into before I showed people, or making 10 options myself, but then selecting only 3 to show to my director. So for this project, it was anything from choosing the right color palette at the right point in the video to make sure we had a really even use of our brand colors, or it was selecting an option for like a different type of composition for how we could visualize one scene, or it was selecting a couple of really kind of high fidelity style frames and choosing which one actually kind of works the best within the sequence. And then the last point you need that creative vision is for that final 5%. It is looking at something that is nearly finished and figuring out what you could do to improve it just a little bit more and add that little spice of magic. And I think sometimes this might not even be visible to the majority of people, but once you do that change, you really feel it. And for the animators in the room, that could look anything from, tweaking a animation curve. And maybe for those who aren't animators, this represents the speed in which something is moving in our animation, and a difference, even that kind of difference would make quite a change to what the animation looks like. And so it would be going through a video and checking all of the animation curves and making sure, that they're all feeling the best that they could possibly be by that last render. So shall we have a look at the video that this resulted in? Cool.
Animation. At Never Sit Still, we've got the process down to a fine art.
We begin with the drumming circle to awaken the mighty God of Motion. Just kidding. It starts with your idea.
We ask questions to understand your goals and uncover what you really need.
We're all about collaboration.
We defy imagination and bend reality while exploring visual styles and how things might start to move.
Everybody loves this bit.
Construct a narrative that's clear and concise. Sketching storyboards to ensure it flows.
Discover a track, then slice it and dice it.
Find the perfect voice
that truly embodies
your brand's personality. And we animate.
Elements assemble, glow and soar. Your story bursts into life. Everything is considered, crafted,
and timed to perfection.
Whatever your idea,
we'll make it move.
We never cut corners.
We never slow down.
And we never,
ever sit still.
I need vision, both to do my job and also to help me through life. And I feel like through the process of writing and preparing this talk, I've actually tapped into it so much better, and I understand even more how I can use it. Vision is the result of inspiration and a source for drive. Vision can be literal, but even without it, vision exists in the eye of the mind and is the ability to think, plan, and imagine. Vision is inspired by people, places, and stories. Vision defines your life and guides your creativity. And so, to leave you with one final question, where does your vision come from? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, one more round of applause. That was so amazing. And no, you're not going anywhere. Because we have time for Q&A. So yeah, just put your hand up if you have a question. I have one actually. I'm just because I've got the mic, so I'm going to start. What was the story about George, yes and no.
Okay, yeah. So his legal and official birthday was not correct at all. When I think security and stuff back then when he came to Australia was obviously less intense than it is now. And they were asking him, what is your birthday, when he was going through, I don't know, border control, customs, whatever. And he said, yes. And they said, okay, is it the 14th of November? And he said, yes. And that is what was officially his legal birthday. Yeah.
So good. Okay,
Yeah.
glad yes, I have a question there. So,
Oh, microphone? Oh, okay.
just repeat the question.
Yeah, that's true. I'll do that next time.
Yeah, that vision exercise got me thinking about kind of creative visualization, which I don't think I'm very good at, and that's given me an idea that maybe it really works instantly and kind of naturally for some people and not others. Maybe. Do you use kind of visualization in the traditional sense of just kind of closing your eyes and imagining things, and if so, how? And do you notice have you gotten better at that? Is that a learnable skill?
Thank you. Yeah, good question. I think it definitely is a learnable skill to an extent, but maybe, off the bat, some people do have an advantage. Like I said, I think I'm around a 4, and the thing that came to mind when you were asking that question was when I was drawing that image of the apples, I was like, yeah, I know what an apple looks like, right? And it wasn't until I started physically drawing the apple that I was like, yeah, I can see the apple now. And so I think there was an element of getting something down and then being able to use that to help see more clearly. I think for me, what I see when I have, I guess, a vision is, I don't know, it feels like nothing is there, but it's a really clear thing at the same time. But it's not, yeah, that's super confusing. But what I'm saying is it doesn't stop me, the fact that I don't think I can see things super detailed or, yeah. Yeah, cool. All right.
Who else has a question? Oh, there's one right in the back. Do you want to yell out in a really loud voice?
I can try.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story about your grandma. I'm still processing that. You were saying he has extreme resilience, not just curious. Do you know where his resilience came from? Someone going through all of that, really not.
Yeah, I'm not super sure, but I think maybe the answer to that might be love. I think that his mother, you can tell, I guess, from some of those stories, she really loved him a lot and was coming up with crazy things to save him and protect him. So he grew up with that. And then later in life, it was really, he loved his family so much. And despite, kind of the issues didn't stop there. He had to have a lot of surgeries throughout his life. And I think he was always thinking about his family, his daughters and his grandchildren.
So have there been any times that you've been halfway through a project and it's not quite aligning with your vision? How do you rejig that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for those who didn't hear, yeah, it was how do I realign something when I feel like I'm halfway through a project and it's not lining up to the vision. And I think the project that I showed is a good example of that. And anything that we've done as internal projects for the studio, we don't fully dedicate a proper schedule to it. It's kind of when people have free time, we work on it. And so when we're working on a project like that, it really takes a lot of wrangling, and it takes a very long time to get anywhere. And so halfway through that process, I was definitely feeling doubt and going oh my God, what have I made people do? People have put so much time into this and it doesn't look like what I want it to look like. And I think, the only answer that I have to that is that you just have to keep going and you can keep working on something. There's a balance of knowing when to stop as well. But I think you feel it in your gut when you're stopping because it's good enough versus when, it's not there yet and you have to keep going. And, respect to everyone on the team who put up with me on that project, because we did change a lot of things a lot of the time throughout. We pivoted ideas hard. We got pretty much through the whole design phase. And then I was like, oh my God, we haven't got any scenes that showcase working with footage. And that is a big thing that we do as well. And I wanted to include that. So I had to kind of throw a scene out. So sorry. And replace that with something that, you know, included footage. Any other questions? Yeah.
What was your experience like working on this project, trying to communicate your vision to the other people in your team? What's that like?
Yeah, that is definitely something that, you know, I can do, but sometimes I don't think I'm amazing at it. I could get better at it. A lot of the time it was trying to like listen to what people wanted to do and letting them do their idea and then helping guide that to make sure it was in line with the overall brand kind of vision. But then I think as well, yeah, just making sure if I couldn't communicate something, finding a reference that could help or drawing it down. I think we are all quite visual people, and, you know, seeing something goes a lot further sometimes than explaining when you have the ability to do that. So, you know, yeah, obviously that's one of the ways that I would do it is I would have to sketch it out or jam it out. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel often you have the vision really clear in your head and your team has the vision really clear, but the clients, especially clients who are not creatively inclined, sometimes communicating your vision to them can be really difficult, even when you're providing visuals or references.
Yeah.
How do you kind of bridge that gap with clients to help them get on the same page with you and see the vision as clearly as you and your team are seeing it?
Yeah. I think actually this is more comes down to like marketing in a way. Like, you have to sell it. You have to get really excited and explain to them, if they can't see it, why they need it, even if they can't see it, and get them so excited and hyped up that they really trust you. I think clients really respond to people when they're pitching, when you're able to get a really good rapport with them and get them really excited. And I think when you talk, like, for example, with storyboards, we often have to walk clients through storyboards that are static and they struggle to see how that could look in motion. And the difference between explaining storyboards in a kind of monotone way and then we do this and then we do that, compared to like, and then when you get to this, it's going to explode off the screen. It's going to, you know, like the excitement that you bring to it actually, I think, kind of helps bridge that gap more than visuals can if you don't have visuals available.
As a designer, like, and when clients bring in briefs and stuff, and you're going through the process, and you maybe sort of like get to a bit, and you're like, oh, I don't think this is the right feel. But then you all individually probably have your own style and, you know, better ways to do things. But is there times where you go, oh, I should probably go to this person? Like, maybe I need like more looser, you know, like sketchy sort of illustration animation style, or does everyone do the same, can do the same ability of the job? Do you know what I mean? Right.
And do you mean in the context of the team at Never Sit Still? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we know?
Like often the
yeah.
client doesn't know what they sort of want.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
But then maybe sometimes you go through that as you're like exploring it, you realize, oh, maybe it needs to be, I don't know, less clean and you know, like, and it needs a bit more.
Yeah.
Does it swap, or do you just sort of?
Yeah, okay, so basically how do we get the visual that the client's after when they don't know what they're after, and who do we get to do that if we need to change up the style? Is that kind of like?
Yeah. How does that, or is it just go, okay, you do this brief and...
Yeah, I think at least at Never Sit Still, we're quite collaborative and we will switch people around if we feel like, oh, it's really missing this something and we need someone whose special ability is doing that. We'll bring them onto the project, you know. Like, just for an example, I feel like sometimes people get themselves in a bit of a niche with a skill that they're good at. And so if that comes up on a project, then, you know, if we need cavalry, we'll go to Mel or to Moo, or if we need touch designer, we'll go to Izzy, or if we need a zoetrope, we'll go to Supriya, you know, like, it's kind of like, we will just shuffle that around based on the needs. But as far as getting what the client wants, we do extensive round of R&D in the beginning where we try to test as much as we can. I think we're equally looking for what to throw out as much as we're looking for what to keep in, because it really helps us when we show the client something and they go, yeah, we don't want that at all. So yeah.
I reckon that's, guys, any other last questions before we wrap up? Oh, okay, one more. You're lucky last. Go for it.
Do you guys ever go beyond, like, do you ever dream of a vision of a style, for example, that's something that you don't have with your existing team? Like, you work with freelancers, you work with other artists to bring your vision forward?
Yeah, so do we work with freelancers or other artists to cover gaps in our style? And I think definitely we do that. Yeah, we love bringing on people who can fill those gaps. And, you know, we're always looking for people when we're hiring new staff who can bring an extra talent to the team, or when someone on the team would like to learn a new skill, it's always encouraged so that we can fill that gap.
Okay, guys, give Zoe another round of applause. Well, that concludes another month of Creative Mornings. Guys, have a beautiful Friday, have a beautiful weekend, and we'll see you next month. All right. Bye.
Thank you.